Okay. I think we're live. Is it showing up for you?
I'm looking on LinkedIn. It still says it's starting soon, but let me try reloading this page.
Here we go.
Okay.
Yes.
It still says it's starting soon on my end.
No, it's up.
Yeah. Yeah, mine says it's starting soon. I'll refresh it again.
Okay. It's live. I think there's just a delay if you look on LinkedIn. So I think we should go business as usual.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going full screen, so I'm not going to be able to see anything.
Yeah, there's a big delay, it looks like. Hi.
All right. Let's see. All right. You can see the slide? Mariana?
Yes, there's a big delay.
Oh, the delay's even on your end.
Yes.
Oh boy. Okay. Let me know when you can see the slide, and I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, I can see the slide. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I can't see the chat. So that's all you.
Okay, we're going to try this. We're going to try it. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I can't see how many people are with us. Yes. Anna, I'm going to try going out and coming back in.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. We are using Restream for the first time, and it is giving us some hell. All right, Amanda, thank you. Samad, thank you. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, good to see y'all. We have been having trouble with LinkedIn all morning, so I appreciate y'all bearing with us. Mariana gets back, we will be ready to go. All right, looks like she's back. Okay, I see we have like 30 people. I'm gonna reshare the presentation. If you see in the bottom right with chat, we can see everybody. Can you hear me, Mariana?
I can, but I'm getting feedback from what you said like 2 minutes ago. It's strange.
Exit out of LinkedIn. Exit out of LinkedIn.
Okay.
Because that's where the delay is.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just get this party started. It's 3 minutes after. Right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. We are so excited. We've been looking forward to this, and thank you so much for your patience with our technical difficulties. It is what it is. We're about to kick things off here. As you probably are aware, today we're bringing you a sneak preview of a topic we built a few workshops around. This is not the full content. It's just a little teaser, appetizer, if you will. We're going to be sharing our info at the end of the session for anyone who wants to know more about the suite of options we've created. But a few housekeeping tips before we get rolling. First and foremost, we have some thought questions for some short activities that we have planned that I believe, Anna, you had put in the post for this event on LinkedIn. So if you're somebody that needs to process your responses, you can find the questions we'll be asking there. And then this is going to be a little bit different from most virtual learning sessions in that we're going to ask you to actually keep your phones on and close by in case we can actually get Mentimeter to work. If not, we've got a contingency plan, so no worries. You can hear me okay, Anna? Everything's cool so far?
Yep, I think we only hear the delay if we have LinkedIn open. So thanks
Okay.
for bearing with us, y'all. We know the unwritten rules of work. We don't know any of the rules of technology. And, LinkedIn and Mentimeter have been throwing us curveballs all morning that, of course, they didn't while we were going through this rehearsing. So it is what it is, flexibility.
Okay, so let's get started with some intros. My name is Mariana Ortega. I'm a first generation professional and certified coach, helping other first gen pros and 21st century leaders navigate complex career environments. I have over 20 years experience in learning and talent development across industries from ed tech to entertainment. I coach leaders at all levels in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. For those who may not be familiar with what a first generation professional is, it's someone who's the first person in their family to graduate college and achieve a white collar career. So this is a big reason why the unwritten rules resonated with me and why I was so drawn to Anna's research. I chose to study human centered leadership as the focus of my thesis for my master's degree in adult learning. So that's what qualifies me to speak with you today. And I'm thrilled to be here. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to my partner.
Thank you, Mariana. So, hi, I'm Dr. Anna Kallschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, which is the type of psychologist nobody knows about, and that's okay. We look at workplaces and how they impact people and organizations. My contribution to the field was my master's thesis, which was the first to identify that a low-income background is still stigmatized at work, even after people move up in social class. So, if you grew up in poverty, even if you're middle class now, there is stigma. And then my dissertation and the work I've done since over the last decade has been on the unwritten rules of work for people who do experience social class mobility and how that intersects with race, gender, and neurodivergence. I'm not a first generation college student. My father was, so I do stand on my parents' shoulders in that sense, but I am from a very rural blue collar town where my dad went to college, but he worked at a pulp mill his whole life. And that is the whole reason my town exists. So I still was very confused when I went to college and people asked to check my teeth to see if I had any. So still cultural differences, even with continuing generation privilege, and that was part of my passion. So today we will go over what culture is, because it's been a bit of a buzzword lately, or the past few years, not just lately. We're going to give you an introduction to what the unwritten rules of work are, my framework, and then Mariana's framework on the human-centered leadership principles. I'm going to go over one unwritten rule of work, and then she's going to go over the antidote. So when we crossed paths on social media talking about our work, we realized a lot of my unwritten rules that I'd found, she had the antidote for in her human-centered leadership framework, and that is why we have partnered together. And we're going to go over tips and tricks for navigating these and have a little scenario practice at the end. We hope to open for Q&A. I usually like answering questions as I go along. I can't see the chat while sharing the screen. Hopefully Mariana can, but feel free to drop them in the chat just so you don't forget. We are very forgiving of short-term memories. Trust me. So with that said, I want to start us out with a little thought prompt, so to say. So I'll show it on the screen, but I'll read it aloud. A child is at a sleepover with a friend. They are cooking a pot roast. The child notices the friend's mom putting the whole pot roast in the crock pot. Wait, the child says, don't you have to cut it in half first? The friend's mother laughs and says, no, silly, why would that make a difference? The child feels a little foolish but keeps cooking. Later at home, the child tells their mother about the situation. I thought we had to cut it in half because you always cut the pot roast in half. Why do we? Her mother pauses. I don't know, she says. That's what my mother always did. At the end of the week, the child's mother calls her own mom. She asks her the question, why do we always cut a pot roast in half? And her mother laughs and said, I used to cut the pot roast in half because at the time our crock pot was too small for the whole roast. And while this isn't a work-specific example, I like to share this at the beginning of our workshops because I want to make it clear that we all have things that we do that are normal for us that are not normal for other people. And we may call others out on it, and we may not mean to make them feel foolish. We just may not realize it in the moment. And these things don't have to be good or bad or the right or the wrong way. They just are what they are. But if we're going to be holding people to standards in our own kitchen, we need to tell them what the standards are. And sometimes when we're working with other people, we don't realize that our standards aren't universal. And so this is why I like to lead with starting by talking about what culture really is. So I'm a nerd, so I'm going to start with a definition, but it's going to get more interesting, I promise. Definitionally, cultures are the behaviors, norms, beliefs, and values that are not only accepted in a social group, but expected. Each culture has norms, and a norm is a behavior, one of these behaviors, values, etc., that is accepted in these contexts. But cultures often have subcultures. If there's any, a lot of y'all are American, think about it, that we talk about American culture, but if you've been in New York, you know New York is different than California, is different than Texas, is different than Florida, right? We all have subcultures. And organizations have subcultures too, and these can vary based on hierarchy level, the team you're on, and even the industry you're in. I ask people all the time, do your marketers and your engineers eat lunch together? Usually they don't. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a different subculture. And I like to ask people if they've ever seen culture represented as the iceberg. So, Mariana, can you see the chat?
I can, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to ask y'all who are watching, have you seen the culture iceberg? And let me know what they say. Nobody has?
I'm not seeing any responses in this platform. I don't know if they're showing up on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, I was seeing the responses earlier, so maybe nobody
Me too.
has.
Yeah,
So,
maybe no
the
one has.
culture iceberg is intended to show that culture is only visible in a small piece. That the top of it is what we see, but the majority of it we don't notice because it's underwater. I get the point of this framework, but I actually don't like it because, in my experience, the past decade of research, what I've realized is culture is not the iceberg, it is the water. Because I don't think that fish swim through water thinking about water. And I don't talk to fish, though I wish I could. I think that because I don't think about air until it's gone. And then I need it immediately. And that is what culture really is it's something we don't think about until we're outside of our pond of water. Because our own cultures, we don't consider them to be cultural. We think of them as reality. We think of them as the way things are and not our interpretation of reality. But as soon as we're put into somebody else's pond, we know the water has changed. Okay? So I think that culture is full of unwritten rules that we don't notice until we're in somebody else's unwritten rules and we don't know what they are and they don't even realize they have to tell us. So I define the unwritten rules as the implicit, unofficial guidelines that govern behavior, communication, and decision-making in professional settings. They are what is assumed everybody else knows. So I'm not talking about what is in your employee handbook, though of course employee handbooks are influenced by culture as everything is. I'm talking about what nobody thought they had to put in the handbook because they already thought it was professional and the way things are. My research has found 8 categories of unwritten rules so far. We don't have time to go over all of them today. So the one I'm going to talk to you about is the one that I find most annoying and the one I find that resonates with people the most is speaking indirectly. Because this is a conflict for pretty much all of the groups of race, gender, class, and neurodivergence that I have talked to. And Mariana has the perfect complementary human-centered leadership approach to it. But all of these rules, even though we won't get into all of them today, there is an underlying idea behind all of them. And that idea is that there is one right way to do things. One right way, often called professionalism. And when there's only one right way to do things, it stifles innovation, reduces creativity, lowers the sense of belonging, and you stop anticipating new trends and reaching new audiences. So it's not just an issue for the individual, it is also an issue for the business. And I will get into speaking indirectly more in depth later, but I'm going to pass it back to Mariana to introduce human-centered leadership.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I thought I'd start with a few statistics to explain why human-centered leadership matters in the context of the unwritten rules. So back in 2022, the consulting firm Gartner surveyed over 3,000 employees from across industries and asked if they believed that their direct manager is a human-centered leader. What percentage do you think responded yes? Drop your answer in the chat. And again, I think we might have a delay, so those might not come through right away. But yeah, what percentage do you think said yes? My supervisor, I believe, is a human-centered leader. Okay, so it's not showing up in Restream yet. I imagine that there's probably some visible responses in the chat on LinkedIn. But until those start coming through, I'm just gonna kind of let you know what the response was. Okay, here's some now. 90%, 40%, 5%, 50%, 10%. Wow, so
All
many of
over.
you are really generous. So here's the deal. 29% said yes, which is really low. That's less than a third. So fast forward a couple of years. In 2024, the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, did a survey of HR professionals. And what they learned is that talent acquisition, which has been the number one focus for HR teams the past 2 or 3 years, fell from the top of the priority list to number 7. Instead, leadership and manager development is top priority now for HR professionals, with 51% of CHROs saying it's their main concern. And around 40% of those CHROs also said that they were interested in teaching human-centered relational skills, such as the ability to inspire teams and manage conflict. So understanding how to lead others through the unwritten rules supports those objectives. So human-centered leadership could not be more relevant for organizations right now. We can advance the slide, Anna, please.
Mhm.
So the main difference is that when you think about human-centered leadership, this style is based in relational power. Relational power is what drives influence and buy-in. So it's different from the power that's conferred by your title or your expertise. It takes into account the entire person, in addition to their working environment and the role that they have. And it also takes into account the core functional leadership skills like strategic planning and operational expertise, and complements them with these higher order leadership capabilities. So, your next question that you might be thinking are, what are higher order leadership capabilities? Um, Relational power is what's demonstrated beyond functional expertise. So, higher order capabilities are the relational skills, competencies, and attributes that complement strategy, operational expertise, all of those kind of classic leadership skill suite type of attributes. So, they also humanize leaders in as three-dimensional people, not just the teams. And there is so much data to support that leaders who master both their functional and higher order capabilities increase performance, productivity, and innovation. In fact, research from Accenture shows that human centered leaders are nearly 21% more likely to generate innovative ideas compared to leaders with more autocratic styles. So, similar to Anna, there are a list of higher order capabilities, 5 in total. These are the primary higher order capabilities. All of these relational attributes are antidotes for the unwritten rules because they challenge traditional norms of power, and they help to demystify unwritten rules for teams. We cannot cover all of these in our short time together, so we're going to focus on one: communicating with transparency. So, with that, let's get into the unwritten rules, Anna.
Perfect. So I'm going to get into the unwritten rule of speaking indirectly. And since it seems we have a delay here between when we see the comments, I'm going to go ahead and ask the question: how has indirect communication shown up in your work life? What does that look like for you? How has it impacted you? And so I'm going to present what my data has shown, and then I'm going to ask Mariana to tell me what y'all put in the chat. So speaking indirectly is very different for people who are from working class backgrounds or from or who have a neurodivergence such as autism and ADHD, because it relies heavily on contextual cues. What that looks like in organizational settings is saying things like softening direct request, like, when you have a moment, would you mind? When the implied meaning is do it now. Or using qualifying language, like, I was thinking perhaps, instead of saying, I want you to do this. And downplaying urgency, saying no rush, but do it right now. And cushioning feedback, like saying this is great and here are some thoughts, when you really mean incorporate this or it's not going to get approved. And avoiding direct disagreement, like, that's an interesting perspective, instead of saying not about it, not for it. And this is very different. Like, if you had parents who are blue collar, indirect communication is not encouraged because it's a safety issue. You don't indirectly tell somebody on a construction site that if you don't mind, I would suggest that it does appear that the wall might fall down, and if you want to not get hurt, I would suggest, but I'm not telling you to get out of the way. If you do that, somebody's going to get hurt. So instead, you don't say that. You say the wall's coming down, move. And that person isn't going to think, wow, they're really bossy and rude. They're going to be thankful that they looked out for them. And so when these communication styles are socialized at work, they're still socialized in blue collar families. And because our school districts, particularly in the US, are funded by property taxes, you have people of similar classes living close together. So it's also normalized in people's schools. So until you have an experience like Mariana, where you become a first generation student and you start going to university and then everybody's talking around the problem and giving indirect feedback, it can be startling. And this can have a big impact on business, because the number one issue for 70% of business leaders is communication problems. Do we have anything in the chat, Mariana, from my question about how indirect communication has shown up for our attendees?
We sure do. Here's some responses. The mismatch of the need to tell leaders hard truths and their ability to hear it without being personally hurt. Confusion and lack of clarity. Looks like people asking questions instead of making comments and expecting me to read between the lines.
Yeah.
The dreaded feedback sandwich. Yeah, we've all experienced that, I'm sure. Direct reports who struggle with subtext and then receive negative feedback from supervisors. This is interesting. It's a stylized language, a prestige dialect often used as a form of gatekeeping. So that's, and someone agreed with that. Yes. I don't appreciate downplaying urgency. I know you're busy, or I know you have a lot of other things to do, but just say it.
Yeah, so I like that they pointed out that it's the subtext, and that's where the neurodivergent component can come in, because not everybody's brain works the same way. It's estimated that about 20% of our population is neurodivergent, and so there's difficulty picking up on subtext when it is not explicitly said. So already a fifth of your population is going to be struggling with this, and then you add class components. And there's also research showing there's international components here as well. So what it can be used and is often interpreted as, and sometimes rightfully, gatekeeping and hoarding power. It can also be a cultural difference in that, for example, a lot of countries in Asia use indirect communication because of the prioritization on social harmony. But what I always remind people is that if it's not a universal truth, which we know it's not, then you're not preserving harmony if a lot of people don't understand what you're saying. So I am a big believer that you can be direct and that without being rude, and that you can also be indirect and still be rude. That's called being passive aggressive. So the issues we run into when we have such indirect communication that people are confused is it can come across also as a lack of confidence, especially leaders who use a lot of corporate jargon. There's research showing that they don't come across as knowing what they're actually talking about, and they come across as insecure. However, if people are too direct, as a lot of blue collar folks and autistic folks hear all the time, that they are being told they're being disrespectful. And so that can cause a clash even when they didn't mean to. It can also cause issues missing cues about who the authority figure is, since there's not a clear, since nobody's saying do this, they're implying it. It can be hard to know what the hierarchy is. And there can be misunderstanding of instructions and expectations. And the study done by LinkedIn and the dual language app Duolingo Across 8 countries, over 50% of people said their productivity was impacted of people having to repeat things and make up for mistakes that were caused by a lack of communication. So, my recommendation for people who are staff and not necessarily in leadership positions is to decode common phrases, write down what people are saying that you don't know what they mean, and Google it. There's a lot of great TikTok videos, some of them are mine, decoding these phrases, and you can even make yourself a little glossary. If you are in a leadership position, I recommend making one for your employees, especially if it's specific to your organization. You can master diplomatic directness. You can get to the point while being polite. And I think the number one way to do this is to paraphrase. Don't repeat back what somebody said, but paraphrase. Tell them your interpretation of it and say, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You can balance clarity and courtesy by telling someone, I just want to make sure I'm being clear. And a good way to do that is to ask permission to disagree before you do that. It just defers to some authority and makes people a little less defensive. Also, if you're going to contradict, the rule of thumb is to also come with a solution, show you thought about it, don't just bring a problem. I'm a big believer in teamwork, so I would also encourage you to bring up a problem and talk about organizing a brainstorming session and take the initiative there. Because sometimes you do need, or not just sometimes, oftentimes, we need more than one opinion in the room to truly solve a problem, especially if your audience is not monolithic. And I'll pass it back to our leadership expert, Mariana.
Thank you so much. So this higher order capability in particular makes me think of an example from earlier in my career. As a first generation professional, my first corporate job, I was a people pleaser. I didn't know the unwritten rules. I didn't know how to navigate them. So most of the time I was guessing what to do and hoping I didn't make any major mistakes. So the work that I was doing at the time required final sign off from the department vice president. And my approach was to kind of timidly reach out to her randomly. You know, if she didn't respond to an email, maybe I would go to her office, maybe I'd try calling her, both of which terrified me. And most of the time she wouldn't respond, and I would have to beg my partners for more time. So finally, one day she saw me walking by her office and she calls me inside. And now I'm slightly panicked, like, oh God, what have I done now? And she invited me to sit and she said, I notice you've been trying to reach me. I'm usually running from meeting to meeting. So I'd like to give you some tips on how to get me when you need something. Would that be helpful? The relief I felt in that moment, I wanted to cry. So what she said was, if it's an FYI, email me. If you just need my sign off and it's urgent, text me or come by my office if the door is open. And if you need to speak to me about something, make time with my admin. And this was like gold for me. So I wrote it down on a Post-it and I kept it at my desk for the next 5 years. And eventually, when I got my own direct report, I shared it with her as one of the first things in her onboarding so that she didn't have to experience the same uncertainty that I did. So this is a real life example of giving clear direction with care while avoiding assumptions. And it might seem small and inconsequential to some. And I'd submit for your consideration that it's often the small gestures that create ongoing impact. So, how does being intentionally transparent help lead others through the unwritten rules? We can go to that first bullet, please. It reduces uncertainty and increases accountability. When ambiguity is removed from the situation, individuals are more likely to take ownership and deliver results. That second bullet, when there is a shared understanding of goals, when you have that clarity of expectations, it helps to really, it's easier for teams to operate with a unified vision. So it's Locke and Latham's goal setting theory, where specific and challenging goals, when clearly defined, improve performance by enhancing focus and commitment, which in turn also, that third bullet, thank you, it enhances overall productivity, engagement, and performance. So there's more to be gained in virtually every meaningful metric through human-centered leadership versus environments of authoritarian control. And for example, a recent McKinsey report showed that organizations who prioritize human-centered principles of open, transparent communication and cultures of high trust see an average 25% boost in employee productivity. So with this next slide, here are some tips if you want to take on communicating with transparency in a human-centered way. The first thing is to be intentional. Avoid assumptions and share proactively. Now, I want to acknowledge something here because as a leader, you will usually be privy to new information before your team is, especially when it comes to organizational changes. And oftentimes, news that's shared with you is sensitive and not yours to share immediately or directly. So it's understandable why discernment is necessary. However, this caution, as someone earlier mentioned in the chat, can sometimes tip over into gatekeeping. So make it a point to proactively communicate what you can as early and as often as possible. This helps counteract misinformation, it prevents rumors from spreading, and it helps to avoid last minute surprises for your team while reinforcing your credibility as a leader. So communicating transparently and in a human-centered way could sound something like, I appreciate you bringing this up. I hear your concerns, and I want you to know I truly value your trust in me. I'm aware that there's been speculation. However, what I can promise you is that as soon as I have concrete updates, I will share them with you and the team. In the meantime, please continue to come to me with any concerns or questions. I'm here to listen, and I'll do my best to support you through any ambiguity. So when you respond in this kind of way, it acknowledges the question respectfully and directly. It affirms your role as a transparent leader. It reinforces trust because it signals that you will share information responsibly, and it invites continued dialogue. That second bullet, thank you. Listen without judgment. This is what we mean when we say listening to understand. Listening to understand requires consciously resisting the reflex to judge in the moment. It's often the case that the higher one ascends in their career, the more they are validated and praised for their judgment and decision making, it's harder to see oneself objectively. So this can reinforce a mindset of believing that their way is always the best way. This is also known as a fixed mindset. So it helps us when we slow down and listen without rushing to judgment to maintain self-awareness and remain open to new ways of thinking, also known as a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And that last bullet. So again, where you can, extend transparency to, organizational communication, business reporting, business insights. This provides important context that helps teams better understand how their contributions directly or indirectly support organizational goals. So model corporate transparency by inviting teams to, listen into investor calls, monthly, quarterly reporting on organizational performance, things of that nature. So I have a question to ask all of you. And because there's a pretty significant delay for Anna and I on this side,
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of just ask you to contemplate it, and you can absolutely share your thoughts in the chat if you'd like. In the interest of time, we'll move on. But I just wanted to kind of leave you with this. Consider from your observations, would a more transparent culture of communication where you work improve efficiency a lot, somewhat, or not at all? And given the degree to which you feel it would impact if you had a better culture of transparent communication, I would submit for your consideration that perhaps it isn't just a leadership development opportunity in your company, but maybe a cultural opportunity for your organization.
Mm-hmm.
So as Anna is so fond of saying, just because it's normal doesn't mean it works.
Yes. And I hope some people do put things in the chat because I want to read that tea. Oh, for our next,
Vastly.
yes, I love it's qualitative data. So our next step is going to be a scenario discussion, and I think there's like a 30-second to a minute delay on our end of seeing your comments, but I think we are actually good on time, Mariana, so we can wait for their responses if that's a. Are you feeling good about that if when we go over the scenario?
Yes, I have scenario questions. There's a chat here in Restream. I don't know if it'll feed back to the group.
It should.
Um, okay. All right. So it says private chat, so I don't really know what that means, but we are getting some some feedback from the question I asked. One person said vastly, one person said immensely, significantly, a
Making their
lot.
own
So
scales, I love it.
yes. So by and large, this there seems to be a consensus that this is a problem that exists throughout the landscape.
I mean, and that's consistent with international data. Like we said, across countries, communication is the number one issue. And I think at that point, we have to look at while business culture varies, what we're doing within our business cultures, what we're calling professionalism that is causing us so much problems in our professional lives. Okay, so do you want to put are you going to put the questions in the chat now, or do you want me to start the scenario?
You can start the scenario, and I'll put them in notes here wrapping up.
Okay, so I'm going to read a scenario, and then we have some questions in the chat. She's going to put them in now. Feel free to respond, and we have time to pause and wait. And if you see the pause on your end, just take it as an opportunity to breathe. So, scenario: Trina is an individual contributor on the cusp of being promoted to manager. As part of her transition, she will be directly overseeing some people whom she currently works alongside with. One of them is Eddie, a more junior employee with less than 5 years' experience. Trina values Eddie's work and believes he's talented and capable, but she's concerned about communication dynamics with this employee as she assumes her new role. She noticed that when an urgent priority comes up, Eddie will come to her and share in detail, step by step, everything he plans to do from his end to solve the issue at hand. Trina finds this approach unnecessary and time consuming. She feels that Eddie knows how to do his job and he should know that she has faith in him by now. She finds his expanded context to be tedious, especially when there are significant time constraints involved. So she tells him just thank you and that she trusts his judgment to get the job done. At the same time, Trina admits that she has become irritated with Eddie in the past during crisis situations, when he's either repeated work that she or another team member have already done to mitigate the problem, is slow to execute, or get back to her in a timely manner with an update. So our questions that Mariana put in the chat is, one, how is indirect communication contributing to this scenario? Two, what are Trina's blind spots? How could she show up differently as a human-centered leader for Eddie? And three, what are Eddie's blind spots? What could he do differently to better navigate Trina's expectations? And I should tell y'all, this Mariana made this scenario based on her experience leadership coaching. So this is a real life example that maybe is resonating with some of you. So I'll pause until we get some chat responses, unless there's something else you want to add, Mariana.
I just wanted to ask if I put the questions in the chat on our platform. I'm hoping that they translate over to our LinkedIn audience. Can anyone confirm if they can see it in the chat here? Those questions that Anna just proposed?
Probably have to wait like 30 seconds to see, but
This whole morning has just been a learning experience.
we normally, when we do virtual workshops, we don't stream to everyone, of course. So it's a little different doing it this way via Zoom or Teams. So one more tool in the toolkit.
Okay, so the questions, it doesn't look like they transferred over. So with your permission, Anna, I'm gonna go ahead and just ask them again.
Okay.
So what is, okay, thank you so much for the confirmation. All right, so adapting, what is or how is indirect communication contributing in this scenario? Where do you see the pockets of where the wires are getting crossed? So questions 2 and 3 to me have the same answer. Both need to realize their friendship dynamic has changed to a supervisor slash direct report dynamic.
Hmm.
Oh, Rohan, I would love to know more. Like what do you see that Trina could be doing differently as a human-centered leader to make that happen in her dynamic with Eddie? If you wish to elaborate. We have not yet had any other responses come through on our side, but we would love to know also the other questions that Anna had asked was, what are Trina's blind spots as a leader here? What could she be doing differently in a human-centered way? And what are Eddie's blind spots? What could he be doing differently to better navigate Trina's expectations? Okay, Amanda says, Eddie seems to need direct feedback and a sounding board to work out ideas. Trina may not be able to provide that anymore in her new role. Rohan elaborated the idea that he's supposed to know and she trusts him from prior experience. Sherry contributes, Trina isn't telling Eddie in the moment the communication she does or doesn't need. She is expecting Eddie to understand her thank you to mean she didn't require so much information. I'd love your thoughts on that one, Anna.
Mine?
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, is there an Anna in the chat? Or are you talking to me? See, clear communication. This is
The
what it looks
Anna.
like. Yes. So when I read this, I first thought, if Eddie is being that, first I thought Eddie might be neurodivergent, because he may need to make things into smaller steps, and I relate to that myself. And so this just may be his work style, which he may need to communicate to Trina. But my also first thought was that whether he's neurodivergent or not, he may feel like he has to tell her step by step because he hasn't been happy. She hasn't been happy with his work in the past. And so that last paragraph also cues that for me, that it says she's become irritated with him before. And I thought that maybe he's trying to adapt to feedback where he's seen her get irritated before. Maybe she hasn't been happy with something he did, by walking her through step by step to get approval first. And if that's not what she wants and she's still getting irritated, that's going to be irritating for him and disheartening for him if he has gone from taking autonomy to then getting permission and neither has met her expectations.
We've gotten some more thoughts I'm going to share with you. So, Trina is assuming why Eddie is explaining so much and responding based on that assumption. Eddie is missing the nonverbal cues. If she has become irritated with him, it provides him an opportunity to ask questions. Katrina says there needs to be clarity on both ends. Trina should discuss with Eddie her expectations, and she should ask Eddie what he needs in his role. Lisa says it looks like he's possibly acting in a way to not irritate her again, but is guessing neither of them are being clear in either direction.
Yeah.
I guess Trina, needs to set some clear boundaries, express her exact needs in crisis situations. Someone also said Trina needs to be direct, that she doesn't need step-by-step details, but does need to know the tasks Eddie plans to do. So there is no duplication. Eddie needs to tailor the information to give Trina. Needs to tailor the information to give Trina. Sorry, I thought there was more there. And then Serena says, I think Trina needs to coach Eddie. Maybe she takes the time to go over different projects and help him understand that his steps are good steps or not good steps and let him know why. Then directly let him know to run with it. Maybe she outlines what her expectations are and then see where he takes it. It seems like he lacks confidence to run with his projects. Also, it would be helpful if she outlines the team's roles and responsibilities so he knows the limits of his role versus what others do, so things do not get repeated. This is some great observation and feedback. Before I weigh in, Anna, any additional thoughts based on what's been shared?
No, I just appreciate the ability of this audience to see both ends, that it's not a one blame situation, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's to me, this kind of speaks to one of the easiest things that leaders can do. And for whatever reason, either because they say they're very busy or, sometimes leaders fall into this more like traditional mindset of, well, my direct reports should be able to anticipate my needs. Nobody's mind readers here. And
Mm.
everybody has different ways of processing and digesting information. So the thing that I would do first and foremost to take a human-centered approach, or how I would coach Trina, is say, what have you done so far to find out from Eddie, where this impetus to kind of, be very detailed is coming from? And this can, I think, just clear the air in a lot of respects. A couple of people have intimated that, maybe Trina has blown up yeah, at him in the past.
Mhm.
And that's not intimated here, but it could be part of the case, in which case, that's a different type of conversation. That's more of like a difficult conversation. But I think that what we have here is just people need to ask for the clarity. I think maybe Eddie believes that's what he's doing, but the way he's going about it, it's not connecting with Trina. But I
Mm.
would, you're the expert on navigating the unwritten rules from the employee perspective. So I want to make sure that am I on track with you with that, or would you go a
No,
different
I
way?
I agree. I think I mean, ultimately, I think Trina is the one with power in this dynamic. So I think it's for good leadership. I would say it would be good to do what your previous leader had done on this is my communication expectations, right? Instead of
Hmm.
just channels of like, this is the level I need to know and the frequency I need to know.
Right.
They may need to resolve because she may need to distinguish from I don't need you to charge in blind, like maybe what irritated her before, but I also don't need to see every grain of sand at the beach. So, but I think, you're not always paired with a leader who has these skills yet. And while that's the focus of this workshop, I would say if you're early career, you do have an opportunity. If you're early career, that is the stage of your career you are expected to ask questions. And so I think it's fine to ask the open-ended question, how can I communicate better?
Right.
Though if
And
she just says thank you, he may not even know that he's not communicating well. So I do think it ultimately is on Trina, but
it
it's
is.
always an extending an olive branch, right? Or just checking in on. I've updated my communication style lately to try to be more granular. Is that working for you?
And a lot of times leaders aren't even aware of, because they haven't cultivated these skills yet. Not that they're
Mm.
incapable, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So this is why leadership development is important. But I thought it was interesting how, Trina admits that she has become irritated, but that she doesn't say that she has expressed that irritation outright to Eddie. Maybe she's annoyed and hasn't said anything. Again, indirect communication. And in that
Right.
case, in a coaching, I would ask her, okay, so let's explore that a little bit. Like, what is it that really is kind of grinding your gears when he does that? Is it
Mm-hmm.
because it's, time consuming for you and you have other things to do? Is it because, you believe he's capable and this is not, like, kind of what is where's the irritant living on her end? And then
Mm-hmm.
getting some insight as to maybe how that's being communicated in other ways if they're not having an actual verbal conflict. So Rebecca says, I think they both benefit from completing a manual of me. So they share and are aware of each other's preferences. And then Trina should create an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to discuss how they can work best with each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of feedback coming through here. They
Perfect.
may have mismatched information processing styles, bottom up for Eddie and top down for Trina. I think that's what you were getting at with regards to neurodivergence, right, Anna?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, it's on Trina. Agreed. It's always incumbent upon the leader. And it's also a reminder that just because someone is more senior or a leader doesn't mean that they know best all the time. Yes, intellectual humility is another tenet of those higher order capabilities under human-centered leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But that's often the case with managers' blind spots with self-awareness. I couldn't agree more. Self-awareness is really so much of an unlock in leadership. And in corporate environments in this country, we are usually encouraged to kind of sever the connection between our logical brain and the emotional impulses. I always encourage people to look at both sets of data because the emotional impulses that come up for you in the moment, that is data to be examined. What is
Mhm.
driving it? What's the motive behind it? What's the risk that is involved in terms of confronting that or not confronting that? So there's so much more that we could unpack here. Don't you agree, Anna?
Yes. We haven't even talked about race and gender dynamics here. Of we don't know the race and well, we can imply the gender from the names, but like I said, there's also communication style differences nationally. As you know, I've talked about the intercultural conflict style framework, and that cultures from Africa and Latin America tend to be more direct, and people from more European, Middle Eastern countries can interpret them as more aggressive. And then that's a big stereotype. And so, if maybe Eddie has that cultural background, he may be afraid is coming across as too aggressive. So that could be holding him back from bringing it up. But Trina could also have that concern as a leader of that she doesn't want to come across as too aggressive, or the gender stereotype of being a nag. So there's all kinds of things at play here that we could unpack for way longer than the next 15 minutes. But I won't add any more because I want to get to Q&A. But are there more things you want to add before we?
No, no, I'm good. I think so that we have a good 10 minutes for questions, we should go ahead and wrap up. What do you think?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
So we're going to go. I know there's a delay, so I'm going to conclude. So by the time you get this, if you want to go ahead and put in the chat any questions you have for us about unwritten rules, human centered leadership, what we do, go ahead and drop those in. So I will conclude that we have to keep in mind that, and I hope it's been clear throughout, that while there are unwritten rules, we're not necessarily advocating for them. While there may be some situations where you want to apply them and where they can be helpful, we've also talked about a lot of issues that come up, specifically with this one, indirect communication. So if you're an employee, I encourage you to remember that rules are written by people with power, that people with power have the flexibility to follow the rules or to not follow at least some of them, or to make new rules, and the unwritten rules and the consequences of violating them are not the same for everyone. So there can be differences in who's allowed to get away with the rules as well. And that can also vary by level in the hierarchy. And that rules that align with our own cultures are less visible to us because we assume that they are normal and the way things are. And in these situations, we may have some power, even if it's not our company. And so, I mean, I have done the research on unwritten rules, inspired by, seeing people who also didn't know the unwritten rules like myself. But I have to also be aware when I am in situations where I know some unwritten rules that I just think should be obvious and and that they're not. And in those situations, I have an obligation to work on my transparency and to wonder if I gave the right directions and set the correct expectations before I punish the other person in some way, or am at least dismissive. And so, as you climb the ladder, the corporate ladder, the social mobility ladder, all of it, note the impact of the rules that you set for the people who are still climbing. I am not a believer in because it was difficult for me that it should have to be difficult for you. And I'll pass it to Mariana for the leaders.
Thank you. So we can go to that next slide, and we can pull up all the bullet points. So there's just three things I want you to take away from this. Human-centered leaders, they lean into their relational power. There's positional power, which is conferred by your title. There's expertise power, which shows your functional capability. And then there is your relational power. Relational power is where it's at. That is the foundation and of influence and where buy-in begins. So
Mm-hmm.
communicating with transparency, remember, the idea is to reduce or eliminate ambiguity. So you're supporting those clarity of expectations, team alignment, and accountability. And every major metric has a benefit for human-centered leaders, not just in the unwritten rules, but in increasing team performance, productivity, and innovation. And one last stat to give you, a study by MIT Sloan that showed businesses characterized by human-centered leadership principles actually outperform their competitors by as much as 50% in net profitability. So if that sounds like it's an outcome that your organization would like to achieve. Envision what developing more human-centered leaders and a culture of trust could do, not only for your company culture, but the bottom line overall.
Mhm.
And like we said, just because something's normal does not mean that it's right. So as we wind down here, if there were any questions in the chat, I'll pull those up in a moment. But as I mentioned in the beginning, we do offer different versions of this content. We create bespoke formats to reflect the unwritten rules that are impacting your company the most. So we have a 75-minute interactive discussion, similar to what we've done here, but a bit expanded, a 90-minute scenario-based workshop for people managers, and a half-day cultural strategy session for your senior executives. And we're going to flash the contact info. If you want to email us, there's a handy dandy QR code. You can find our socials here if you want to see us yammer more about these topics. Uh, and I have not seen any questions come through the chat. So you're going to say
That's
something, Anna?
fine. I will just add that when we do these, we use Zoom, so there's not the delay.
Yes.
That's important. And I'm going to do something a little unconventional. I'm going to get out of presentation mode, though I'll leave the contact info up because we have a freebie for y'all of pieces of these slides with a few links attached as well to have more information that I'm going to try to send in the chat, but I need to be able to see the chat to do that. So I'll leave that here. And do we have any more chat?
It doesn't look like it, but we're getting a lot of thank yous. Such a valuable session, Mariana and Anna. Thank you. We are so glad that you were able to spend this time with us. Hopefully, you have some takeaways that are insightful that you can start to apply and that are practical for your organization. And we would love to hear more from you. So follow us on socials, connect with us on LinkedIn, email us if you think that one of these modules could fit for your organization. We'd love to. Oh, I saw it come through, Anna. Your freebie is there. Yes, that is your
Okay.
takeaway. You can, use that as kind of a more condensed version of what we talked about here today, but it's something to refer to. Anna, any last words?
No, I would just say shoot us a message on one of these contact info platforms if you didn't get the freebie and you want it, because I sent it and it looks like it goes to YouTube. Okay, I don't know if it's going to TikTok and LinkedIn, but we will make sure we get it to you. Thank you so much for your time and spending your lunch hour with us.
Thank you. Hope to see you all again real soon.
All righty.